Welcome to this installment of BSO Backstage. I'm your host, Desiree Duncan, and of course, I'm joined with Music Director Dan Allcott and Executive Director Laura Clemens. Welcome.
Welcome. Good to be here again.
Yeah, it's always a beautiful day here at Sweet Sally's.
It is. Even more beautiful because of the size of my coffee cup.
Yes, these are huge, and of course, Laura has the delicate.
Yeah, yours is more delicate.
Yeah.
We have the bollicino.
So how about that social at Walter Derryberry's house?
How
that
about
was
that social?
phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah. Walter is one of our, long-standing sponsors, certainly, and sponsored this concert, but he's also, for 50 years, actually, he's been a part of our programming. He was on stage for the very first concert in the chorus, and he does a great job. And a lot of the people who attended the social this time were really glad to have it there because we haven't been hosting socials at Walter's house quite as much recently, so it was a treat.
And it's also appropriate because that is the March concert featured the winner of the Joan Derryberry Memorial Concerto Competition. So Walter and his family have a particular amount of pride and came forward with some extra support for that event. It was really great. And to have a young soloist who's a representative of our department do such a great job and even performed at the social. That's the fun thing about the symphony socials. You never know what's going to go down at a symphony social. Like this time we had, Constantine played a piece for solo Egyptian tambourine. Last time in February we had a piece with a cello ensemble and a boom box. So we try to keep it mixing up at the socials. But mostly it's a great time for us to regain some contact with people that we see fleetingly on a concert afternoon and to reach out to our audience and get to know them a little bit better. So it's really nice for people to open either a home or a business that we can get into that situation and cultivate our audience. So, and we'll have one more social for the April concert. It'll be just as exciting.
So are these, how often are they held at houses versus businesses?
Well, it varies. I mean, frequently, first of all, we don't always have a symphony social. It depends on our calendar. It also depends on the calendar of community events. Like if WCTE was having a huge function on a Friday night, we would probably try to avoid it if we could, because we share so many of the same patrons.
Much appreciated.
We try. And it also is about the availability of the artists. Sometimes if we're not going to have a guest artist in town, like in November, our guest artist didn't arrive until noon, the day of the concert. So, it varies a little bit. But when we have the opportunity and looks like we have a good place to do it, then we do it. And it's a good chance for us to touch base with people.
And not only that, but this is our opportunity for Dan to give a concert preview in Cookeville. We do this every concert month. We go to Crossville for a concert preview, and this way we get to talk to the folks in Cookeville too. And Dan is just brilliant at these pseudo lectures, I guess.
I keep it pretty brief. That's a social situation. I don't want to interrupt people's fun time, but because of our rehearsal situation, and a lot of concerts or orchestras, the music director will actually be involved in a formal preview before the concert. Well, here we're lucky that Dr. Catherine Godis does a concert preview lecture from 2 to 2:45 before our 3 o'clock concerts. I would not be available to do that because I'm usually shaving at about 2:35 because the orchestra rehearses up till about 2:30 a lot of days, and then I go and kind of relax for half an hour or so. But anyway, it does give me a chance to talk about that. And in addition to this, and in addition to our Crossville luncheon series, it's part of our outreach and education because it is interesting. Many people will, come up and remark about just, 1 or 2 interesting facts that they learned about the backstory of a piece of music that really kind of enlightened it for them. And I had spoken to somebody about probably the thorniest piece on the March concert was the one by Frank Martin, who's a Swiss composer. And I had talked to a good friend of mine even just a couple days before that, and we were talking about the nature of this piece, which he's also conducted. And some people think it's kind of a thorny piece, but it's a little bit humorous. And he laughed because his father-in-law is Swiss. He goes, yeah, that's about as much humor as the Swiss, have right there. He's the funniest one, Frank Martin. So in explaining that to people, that even though harmonically it's a little more dense than music of the 19th century, that it does have humor and beauty, and that's the intention of it. It's just a little bit different sounding. And someone told me that in the audience that they were glad to know that because it's easy for people who don't hear a lot of more modern music to think of it as angry sounding. And it's not. That's not the way it's intended. So.
And it was nice to see the faculty woodwind group up there performing, and I know that they were featured on our show, Live from the Farm. So it was cool to see them again. And then there was an addition of the trombone.
Right. This is a concerto for 7 wind instruments, and so you have, in addition to the woodwind quintet, you have trombone and trumpets, and so it's great to see them all. And like you said, we had them all lined up on the front of the stage, and that's a great thrill for people. And it used to be that. In the early 20th century, there were some experiments with how you seat an orchestra. Mostly Leopold Stokowski, who was this kind of a charlatan, great conductor, just did stuff like he had a distinct European accent of unknown origin since he was from Philadelphia. But anyway, he sometimes would put the winds at the front of the stage and the strings in the back, just to kind of mix it up or whatever. And he was always trying something new. But in this case, they're the featured soloists. And it really is fun for people to see them because it's viscerally exciting to see what goes into playing an oboe or a horn. And if it's kind of hidden in the back all the time, and we do that for the reasons of acoustics, that works out well. Yeah, people get a chance to see them at work.
Yeah, you could hear a rumble from the audience when they saw the bassoon. Like, so many people were excited about seeing the bassoon.
Yeah, because, well, one, our bassoon player is like 6'8" or whatever, and it's this, this machine. Really, it's so interesting to see the workings because on a bassoon, especially when you're pressing the keys, you can see the apparatus moving a little bit if you're close enough up, and so that's not something people see all the time. So.
And the first piece that you did, that was a very moving, very rousing piece. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, the Monteverdi was the neat thing about this concert was that the Monteverdi was written in 1607, and the last piece, the Séjourné Marimba Concerto, was written in 2006. So I like having that 399-year span. I think it's the largest span I've ever done between pieces. But Monteverdi wrote music at a time that was very important, and it's kind of neat. It's a good segue into what we're going to talk about more today, which is opera. And Monteverdi wrote what we consider to be the first opera. It was called a play with music at that time because they hadn't invented the term opera at that time. But what we did is we took the instrumental music from that opera and performed it. And it's really neat to hear it, and it actually sounds good with music of a more modern era, like even better than it would with something from the 19th century because it was before harmony developed in a way that we expected it. So,
and of course with Constantine's performance with the marimba and strings. Now I'll be honest, like I enjoyed it, but it was so interesting to hear the marimba and then the orchestra with just strings.
Oh, yeah. Well,
what was
a lot of this conversational aspect of the concerto because the marimba is a unique sound, and so there was a lot of kind of the orchestra would make a statement, and then the marimba would make a statement, and then in the last movement, everybody comes together in kind of a rhythmic romp for a while. So, but also, again, very viscerally exciting to see somebody with 4 mallets and all that action right up in front of the stage. It's a nice thing about our small hall that makes that super exciting.
And it's almost more, of course, the performance of the music, but it's almost a dramatic performance from the
That's
percussionist.
the benefit of being there. You can buy a recording, but it's nothing like being in the hall and experiencing it with people from your community.
And of course, the piece that he did at Walter Derryberry's, where it was just a tambourine, and the fact that he got all those different sounds out of one percussion instrument.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's amazing. So how has it been working with the students that win the competition?
It's the most nerve-wracking thing for me every year because I want this to go well for them, and every year it does. So that's a nice thing about this competition because it's not like me working with Michael Chertok, who I've done 4, 5, 6 concertos with or whatever, who's a pianist who I know he can come in at the last minute, we can rehearse for 2 seconds and be done, and we're going to be okay. We can make it happen because we're experienced performers, but for a student, it's one big opportunity for them. So it's relieving when it goes well, and it did.
Good. Yeah, it was a beautiful performance, and congratulations to Constantine. But to take a different switch, something that I don't know how often you do this, but I know for the upcoming concert you're having an art piece that will be for auction or for sale. Tell us a little bit about this piece.
Well, what happened was we're going to be performing the opera Tosca by Puccini. And during the art prowl a couple of years ago, as I always do, I go through Mary Lee Hall's studio, and my daughter collects and pieces from Mary Lee, some of her hearts that are very famous, and I collect bowls from Mary Lee, and I have to buy a new one because we break one every once in a while. And she had a piece that she had created, a sculpture for a theme from an opera at one point. I said, oh, I really, really want that. And I talked to her about buying it, and I was hemming and hawing, and then somebody else bought it. And so I had the idea to commission her to make a piece for the Bryan Symphony this year. And so as a part of my family's commitment to the 500 for the 50th this year, we've commissioned Marilee to make the sculpture, and then we're going to have an auction for the sculpture, and the proceeds will benefit the Bryan Symphony. And so it's it was fun to talk to her about this, and so we went in, and Marilee and I we got to talking, our hands flying around like crazy, which we're both apt to do, and she created exactly the great piece that I thought she would, and so I think we're going to have a chance to see that for a few minutes and talk with Marilee about that.
Yes, so let's head to Marilee Hall's studio to see the Tosca piece that she created for the upcoming concert.
The piece has two names, as a matter of fact. The first name is Tosca and Scarpia. Tosca is the title of the Puccini opera. The woman's name is Floria Tosca. Scarpia is the fellow she has just murdered, and so hence the title Tosca and Scarpia. However, right before she murders him, she utters the memorable phrase, "A kiss from Floria Tosca," and which is really a stab. She stabs him. And so I think "A Kiss from Floria Tosca" is also an appropriate title. Dan Allcott and I spoke about what would be the most fitting scene, and this is one of the more famous scenes, possibly the most famous scene in the opera, this particular time. When I do these figures, what I do is I'll take up the scene, the visuals of the scene, and draw and draw and draw and draw to try to figure out how I'm going to take what I have seen. I saw these on posters and on the internet. I've seen these two-dimensionally, and so I do lots of drawing so I can plan how I want to depict this, and I wanted to create a stage upon which they would be presented and envision it, and then I set to forming my clay figures. First of all, may I say Dan Allcott is a genius, a wizard, hilarious, very inspirational, very funny, great to work with. We started talking about this a couple of years ago when I saw a scene from the opera Carmen in the New York Times, and I thought, wow, I really want to make that. And so I did. So I created this, and I had it on display at the Art Prowl. This was probably 2 years ago. And so I think probably that stayed in his mind, and he told me at some point last year that Tosca was coming, and he wanted me to do this. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity for these two powerful art forms to work together, the visual arts and the performing arts, and it's a marriage made in heaven. The Art Prowl has had a booth for 2 years now, and every year in honor of Wine on the West Side and just wine in general, I have a very successful goblet making workshop in my studio. And my students are then invited to put their goblets on display at Art a la carte, where we have a fine goblet invitational show. And so that is my individual and individual artist participation, and also participation of the Art Prowl. We are very comfortable on the West Side. I'm looking forward to seeing the opera.
Well, what an amazing artist Marilee Hall is, and how we're so lucky to have her in this community. That piece, it's just, what were your thoughts on it?
Marilee Hall, all of us adore. She's like our equivalent in the visual art world here in town. She runs the Art Prowl. She's our icon in visual arts for Cookeville, and so it's appropriate that she works with us on this project. And she gets it. She understands the characters and the stories. We love working with her, and it's also really appropriate to do something this special during our 50th anniversary season as part of the season finale. We have so much planned for the 50th season, and it's been a real delight this year. I think to me it's helped us remember maybe our relevance in the community. You know, if we weren't relevant in this community, we wouldn't be here for 50 years, and that's been gratifying.
It's also about risk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that we decided in this 50th anniversary year is, looking back, the Bryan Symphony didn't come into existence because a bunch of people sat around having safe ideas. You know, that to do neat things, you have to take certain risks or whatever. And so this was kind of a new, fun idea, and Marilee, you know, jumped on it. And it's kind of like when we work with Streamliner Creative, and we created the great poster for the opera. I mean, I go in there and I talk with a very creative person, Bryan at Streamliner. Is so good. I go in there again with my hands flailing, yelling about music and the story and whatever, and then he sends me exactly what I would have wanted for someone to create. So this is the same thing that happened with Marilee's sculpture. I walked in and I saw it and I said, it's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. So
it's like, how do they decipher all of that from all those words that you threw at them?
Well,
and make sense of it.
That's why that's a skill. And in our society, sometimes I think art and music are not seen as a skill. And I think it is a skill. And I think we should be teaching it.
And speaking of other skills, I know that we're doing something also a little different with the opera, and you're working with Asheville, and you're bringing that back here to Cookeville.
Well, one of the skills that I learned when I was in college, I went to a school that when I was studying conducting, we had conducting class every day, and every other day you were either conducting part of an opera or part of a major symphonic work. We had 2 teachers, so we were always in rotation. And it was a school that opera was a big part of our music department. So I learned how to conduct from a great opera teacher, and so it's part of kind of my, you know, lifeblood as a conductor to be pursuing that. And I was lucky enough to be invited to collaborate with Asheville Lyric Opera for the first time about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I think, or 4 years ago. And part of that was me saying, well, I'll conduct, you know, opera over there, but only if we bring the cast back over here, because in my first year here, I actually scheduled an opera, or I asked the board if I could schedule an opera. You know, I said we would do it kind of semi-staged or not staged at all, and then I kept sticking more scenery on the stage or whatever. And this will be the 5th opera we've done since I've been here. Kind of every other year we've mounted an opera. And the reason that the collaboration with Asheville Lyric Opera works out so well is that opera is the most extravagant and expensive of the musical arts. And so to mount a production with singers, and it takes, you know, weeks of rehearsal to put an opera together with all the acting and the scene changes and, you know, choruses and stuff. So by rehearsing mostly with the solo cast in Asheville, which I'll do for 2 weeks, and then we'll have 2 performances, then bring them over here, the only thing we have to take care of is the final logistical changes, and then bringing our chorus. We're going to have the tech chorale singing with us, and a few what we call supernumeraries, which is non-singing roles that we need people on stage. So it's a way to be. We could never stage Tosca here by ourselves. We couldn't afford it. We don't have the resources. We don't have a way to really pull it off with the kind of singers you need for a major opera like that. There are other operas that we can, you know, do, and we've done operas where I've hired principals to come in, and we kind of put it together at the last minute. But this is a really fun way to do that. So I'm excited to do that. I'm excited to go to Asheville for a few weeks and just be all about opera for 2 weeks, so I can focus, because it's a big old opera. You can see it's like very heavy and very thick.
Yes, that is thick.
So to have that be the principal thing on my brain for 2 weeks will be very helpful.
Right.
To get that. It's not something you can kind of pull out of the stack of cards real fast.
And what's the difference between when you're conducting for an orchestra and then you're conducting for an opera? Because you also, you know, as well as the music, the instrumental music, you have the singing, and then on top of that, the acting. Are your hands involved with all of that? Or?
That's a great question, because this is something that people, you know, it's hard to figure out where the music director is and all that. What happens is, there are 3 principal artists in the production of an opera. There's the artistic director. So if you have a lot of scenery, and we'll have what we call hard goods that you can put on the stage. We'll bring a lot of that with us back from Asheville. The drops and flies that they would use in a theater, we will not have, because we don't have a fly space in our theater to hang things like that in the Bryan Fine Arts Center. And then there's a director of an opera who is the stage director. That's the person in charge of direction, just like you would have in a play. You know, you go here, you speak here, you do this, and the music director says, great, but when they're looking here, they have to be looking this way when they talk because they have to see me. And so then that all happens, and I rehearse along with them. For 2 weeks, we'll be doing that with piano, and then we'll have a few orchestra rehearsals in Asheville and then put the show up. But when the show goes on, the only one of those 3 principal partners of the artistic direction is me, because you can't direct the actors from backstage, stage direction. That's all set in place. So what my job is to be able to follow and be flexible for two reasons. One, singing is a very athletic event, and it has to be done live. In opera, you really are not trying to create exactly the same thing every time. You're trying to give a platform under which the singers can and actors can produce the best thing at that moment. There's a lot more flexibility required from the orchestra and from the conductor. Whereas in an orchestra rehearsal, we're really rehearsing to try and perform it like we did in rehearsal. We're rehearsing very specific things and hoping that it goes that way. We do that in opera a little bit, but it's a much more individual athletic event for the singers. So there's just a lot of flexibility that takes place, and it makes it fun. It's way more even viscerally live than just a normal concert would be, because you have one individual singing who can change things a little bit and who needs to change things. Or there's also the aspect of if they didn't get downstage fast enough to get to some place, and, you're going to ruin the action. To do this, you can't just, like in a play, if somebody's late getting on stage, you can wait for a minute. And well, in music, you can't do that because the music keeps going. So there's a lot of live action that happens. Makes it fun.
So this last concert is Tosca the main focus. There's no other pieces mixed in.
It's going to be a 2.5-hour show, and there's 2 intermissions, and it's a great musical piece. Puccini is the most famous or probably well-liked popular opera composer. He's Madame Butterfly, La Bohème. These are the most performed works in the operatic repertoire. But it's really neat because this is opera takes place in a very politically charged atmosphere. It's Napoleonic-era Italy, and there's the balance of powers going back and forth. The Italian city-states were occupied by Napoleon's army in order to liberate the people from the oligarchs, and then Napoleon's army leaves and everything falls apart. So, I mean, it doesn't take too much for us to look at modern times and think, well, what happens when you occupy a country and leave? That makes it a very interesting thing. But the opera is about these individual people who are not a part of this political atmosphere and the way that they're affected by the politics. So I think it's very poignant for our time. And it also has some of the most beautiful music ever written. So that even makes it more poignant, and this is one of Puccini's great talents. He particularly was good at, most of his operas have a woman as a central character who is victimized and heroic at the same time. And there's a great opera in aria, a song in Tosca where she says, I lived for art, I lived for love, and that's the tragedy of how did I become a part of all this? I'm an actress and singer, and yet I'm in the middle of this terrible situation. So I will tell you that in Tosca, I think more people died than any opera ever written. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give it away because it's not that big of a secret. But the best scene in opera ever that happens, and this is the focus of Marilee Hall's sculpture. There's a great scene where the chief of police, who's a bad guy named Scarpia, has made a deal with Tosca that she will be his for one evening, and then he will save her boyfriend from the firing squad. So he turns around and he says, finally, Tosca is mine. And she picks up a knife from the dinner table and says, a kiss from Floria Tosca, and she stabs him in the chest. And he falls to the ground, and then she does her own little religious service there. She puts a couple of candles and puts a cross on his chest and walks away. And so that's a pretty good scene. You don't want to miss that. So to buy tickets for the opera.
Exactly.
So Laura, when does it take place?
I'm sorry.
When does the concert take place?
It is April 21st. And our social, as it usually is, are 2 days before that on Friday evening, the 19th. And the entire season finale this time is so emphatic. At the social, for instance, where we have a new venue, if you will. We have some good friends, some good new friends, JD and Lissa Parks, who have a beautiful home they're going to open to us for this event. And then the opera itself on Sunday, oh my goodness, it could not be a more emphatic way to end the season. As Dan said earlier about, in some ways it's a kind of risky thing for us to do, or it could be if we were doing it all by ourselves. It's also, either way, yeah. It's also very risky, not risky financially, but big financially. It's costing quite a bit, as it should. It's an elaborate production, and we have a whole crew of people who are helping us pay for this. We have some people who partner with us for every opera, and that's Rosemary and Albert Ponti. As well as Angelo and Jeanette Volpe, good Italians who are supporting good Italian opera. We have Regions Bank, a longtime sponsor, and we have the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee helping us out with this too. And we need every penny of that to put this on.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing it, and hopefully you can join us for Puccini's Tosca at the upcoming concert. And thank you for joining us, Dan and Laura, and we'll see you next time on BSO Backstage.